All right, so the men's soccer, or what most of the world call football, the World Cup has been happening in North America in the past month or so, and whether or not you're familiar with it, it's okay. I think we can find similarities with what's been happening around the World Cup and what we may experience here in Oakland and the Bay Area. So recently, sorry, should I do a thing here? All right, there you go. So recently, after winning a hard-fought match in the knockout rounds, the French national team captain received a personal and racist attack. He has a Central and North African family background, and he was born in France, but his national identity and intelligence were questioned. In fact, within the past few years, many seem to be quick to question whether the many talented French players with immigrant backgrounds really belong to their very successful French team. Even when they were not playing, former opponents and fellow French citizens have attacked the identity of these players, most of whom were born in France and grew up there. When they were kids, these players most likely couldn't choose how and where they were raised. And as my mom would remind me, babies do not choose where they are born. So what should they do when things are outside of their control? And what should they do when things seem to be against them? I think some of you may have experienced something similar. Maybe we have people here who have moved to the Bay Area in the past few years from places they're not very similar to here. We have people who have been here a long time, but also have seen our surroundings change. We also have people who have lived in places that weren't fully accepting of us. And in these different scenarios, we may have felt that we're not living in what we were expecting, or we're not living in what we were dreaming of, or anticipating of. And maybe the amount of work it takes to get through each day is beyond what we imagined. Or maybe we don't feel that we have the close relationships we've desired with our family and friends. Or maybe we don't have the possessions and the life experience we imagined. And maybe we didn't imagine that injustice would still be present, whether at home or wherever you live right now. These situations may lead us to feel disconnected, alienated, or even despair. So what should we do? Well, today I want to invite you to see what God does. Specifically, that God is with us, God reigns over every earthly authority, and God's purpose cannot be stopped. So, in our reading, we're looking at the life of Joseph in the Old Testament. The reading that Lena did took us straight to when his life was turning around. But I want to give you some background. Joseph had a family filled with dysfunction. Oh, sounds familiar. His brothers actually sold him to slavery. They even almost killed him. His own brothers, blood brothers. Joseph was sold and brought to a new country, not by his own choosing. And even today, even with globalization, moving to a neighboring country, let alone state, may already feel not as safe as wherever we may call home. And so in this new country, Joseph had to spend around 13 years serving as a slave and a prisoner in a dungeon. He worked diligently, but that didn't seem to matter. He was put to prison because he was slandered, and he was forgotten by those who benefited from him. So, what did God do in those years? How did God show God's self to Joseph and the world? So first, God was with Joseph. So right before the passage we just read, Joseph was brought to Pharaoh. So Pharaoh was a title for the ruler of Egypt, which was a few hundred miles away from where Joseph lived. So back then, the journey between the two places would have taken around at least 2 weeks, probably more. Joseph was brought to Pharaoh to interpret two of Pharaoh's dreams. So in this moment in front of Pharaoh, it would be understandable if Joseph was scared. Man, there were a couple high-ranking officials that offended Pharaoh before. One regained his position, the other one got killed. So Pharaoh could decide whether someone would live or die. So maybe if Pharaoh didn't like the interpretation that he would hear from Joseph, maybe he would have been killed too. But God delivered. Joseph knew that only God could give the interpretation of the dreams, and God gave it through Joseph. And God was also with Joseph in other times, in other hard and challenging times. So Joseph wasn't in denial about his circumstances. Joseph acknowledged that his brothers wanted to kill him. Joseph also did not want to be slandered and put in prison, in the prison dungeon. And for a long time, Joseph's suffering didn't seem to be going away. But at the same time, God was giving him favor. And that's favor on all different types of roles he was given in Egypt. So God showed him favor in slavery, in prison, in being treated differently by the people around him, in uncertain times, like when he had to give dream interpretation. I can't give dream interpretations, but God can. He was given favor in stewarding responsibilities, whether great or small, such as being second in command to Pharaoh. And God showed him favor in reconciling with his family and healing deep wounds. Yeah. Man, my friends, my sisters, my brothers, just as God was with Joseph, God is also present now. Hallelujah. God is with us, even if our situation is confusing or difficult. But why does it matter that God is with us? What could God do if God was with us? In this story, we see that God reigns over every earthly authority. The reason why Joseph was brought to Pharaoh was because there was no one else who could interpret his dreams. Pharaoh was not just the civil head of state, he was also a representative of the Egyptian gods. He was viewed very, very highly, but here he could not interpret his own dreams. God gave the interpretation instead, and this was the interpretation. There will be 7 years of abundance in the land of Egypt, followed by 7 years of great and severe famine that was about to hit at least Egypt and the surrounding region. Joseph said that this string of events has been firmly decided by God, and God will do it soon. So Pharaoh knew he couldn't interpret his dreams, and in our reading from Genesis 41, he decided to make Joseph second in command to prepare for the famine. But Pharaoh should have been the one who's second in command. Why? Because we see that God was the one who was truly first in command here. So God was the one who could decide to bring years of abundance and years of famine, not Pharaoh. God was the one who could bring Joseph from a foreign land to Egypt to not only interpret Pharaoh's dreams, but also to prepare for what was coming. I think Joseph must have acknowledged this because he didn't end up worshiping Pharaoh once he became high-ranking. He was given an Egyptian name, but he gave his sons Hebrew names instead to show his allegiance to God. So God showed that God reigns over every earthly authority. And in Joseph's story, we also see that God's purpose cannot be stopped. The naming of Joseph's kids in verses 50 to 52 showed what was going on in Joseph's lives at that time. His first son, he named him Manasseh, which means he who causes to forget. And Joseph said, "It is because God has made me forget all my trouble and all my father's household." Many of Joseph's brothers wanted to kill him, but God shipped him to Egypt instead. He then suffered great injustice, but now he got to experience some goodness in a foreign land before the years of famine. And the second son, he named Ephraim, which means fertile. Joseph said, "It is because God has made me fruitful in the land of my suffering." Joseph was put to slavery and prison to suffer, but God delivered him. God didn't just allow Joseph to finally have family members in a foreign land, but later on, when the years of famine came, God worked through Joseph to provide food for the many nations during the great famine. And God didn't stop there, because during the years of famine, Joseph's brothers and family came to Egypt because they didn't have food, but Egypt did. And many of his older brothers wanted to kill him years ago, but during the years of separation and their encounter with Joseph, his brothers had a change of heart. Those who used to hate their own brother now recognized their family dysfunction. It's a big thing, recognizing what's actually happening, and chose love instead. They wanted to save their youngest brother. God healed Joseph's deep wounds and helped him and his family reconcile. So despite what people tried to do, God's purpose could not be stopped. So how many of us have wondered what life could have been like if this or that did or did not happen to us? Or how many of us have planned for something else and then only for life to take a different turn? How many of us feel like there are things that are out of control and that there are things that are against us? Earlier, I mentioned about the French soccer players who experienced personal and racist attacks. In the midst of the tension they're in, they have some allies and a head coach who defends them. But they actually have even better news. We all actually have even better news. And that's because we have Jesus. Jesus willingly went to earth. He was forgotten and suffered injustice. He even died on the cross. Then he was raised to life to give us life and reconciliation with God and each other. So in Matthew 28, Jesus said that he is with us, his followers and apprentices, to the end of the age, as we live and become witnesses of God's goodness. In John 16, Jesus said that in him we may have peace. He said, in this world you will have trouble. But take heart, I have overcome the world. Jesus reigns over every earthly and spiritual authority. And Jesus' purpose also cannot be stopped. Jesus breaks all barriers and allows different people groups to be one under God, all the way to the new heaven and new earth. In Ephesians, it says that we are no longer foreigners and strangers, but we're fellow citizens with God's people and also members of God's household. So Jesus has given us a new identity that we can't obtain on our own. We are children of God, loved and cherished by God, and there's nothing that can stop God from loving us. So as we process all these, friends, this next week, I encourage you to ask yourself, how may God have been present in the middle of my struggle?